Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. We have with us today two people who work on the NASA Perseverance rover, which is a part of the Mars 2020 mission. Kavita Kaur is with us. She's a software systems engineer and works on the ground data system team that provides infrastructure and software support for mission operations. We also have with us Soumyo Dutta, who's a part of the entry, descent, and landing team, which helped successfully put the rover on Mars. Welcome, Kavita. Som, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Can you tell us what it's been like the past few days since the rover landed on Mars and what the atmosphere has been like in wherever you work?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity, and it's a great privilege to be, part of this mission. I think the past couple of days, since landing, have been so exhilarating, and it's been an honor, just to be part of this mission. The way things unfolded is just magical. Everything went flawlessly. The entry, descent, landing, that was just amazing. We were all sitting at the edges of our seats, and when we heard touchdown confirmed, Swati Mohan said those words, and it was just, absolutely surreal, but at the same time, very relieving that, we are now on the surface of Mars and everything is okay. And I think that feeling was greatly magnified when we, saw the first image, even though it was not a very clear image, just a simple thumbnail. It was, a great feeling that, and then the footage that we saw of the EDL, the sequence of events all unfolding in such an incredibly perfect manner was just simply amazing. I think it was just out of the world and an unbelievable experience. So I'm like on cloud 9 right now, and we're getting all those images, wonderful data, checking out the the rover, and I tell you, it's just a really good feeling to be part of this mission and where we are right now.
I would echo Kavita's feelings. I just cannot believe that I have been part of a team that has something that landed on Mars. It's just an amazing feeling. And I would say that really after the year 2020 that all of us have gone through, it's a really, really bittersweet moment, but it's also really exhilarating that we could have done that. The rover was named Perseverance actually in February and early March last year. So before the pandemic really affected a lot of us here in the US. So it was named Perseverance before that, but couldn't have had a more apt name. And throughout this last year, being part of the EDL team, the entry, descent, landing team, we are spread all around the country and really at sometimes all around the world, because some of us have been communicating from some other places as well. So the fact that we could work together from all these disparate places, and we were able to land something on Mars within 2 kilometers from where we were actually targeting, and actually landing 5 meters from the actual pixel the computer targeted while it was doing EDL is an amazing thing. So I still can't believe that happened. It's science fiction come to life.
So I was hoping we could talk a little bit in detail about the entry and the landing process. But before that, just to start off, why is it that we keep going to Mars again and again? What is it that we hope to find there? And what is special about Jezero crater where Perseverance has landed right now? Kavita?
Yeah, I would say that I'd like to just begin by answering the second part of the question, which is, why do we keep going back to Mars? I would say that, NASA has the Mars exploration program. And as part of the program, we've had a suite of missions which have been going back to Mars every couple of years. And, we've had this, we have a very well-defined campaign. We started off with what was called Follow the Water, basically to look for, signs of water. Was there ever water on Mars? And that's the question that was answered by the 2 rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. And then we had a subsequent mission, which actually built on what the findings of Spirit and Opportunity. And that particular mission is the Curiosity mission, the rover. It was part of the Mars Science Laboratory mission. That essentially what that answered was whether Mars was ever habitable in the past. And we were able to get quite a bit of evidence, conclusive evidence from the scientific exploration that Curiosity has done. And now we are on Mars again with the Perseverance rover. And this has a completely different objective. The big objective that we are trying to accomplish with this mission is to seek signs of ancient microbial life on Mars. Was there ever life on Mars? And that's the big question. And I think that's a very fundamental question that has been intriguing the human race, humanity as a whole, whether there is life anywhere else beyond the Earth. And we're going to find the answer to that question. So that was one of the reasons why the Jezero crater was actually chosen as the landing site. But it was full of water at one time, nearly 3.6 billion years ago. And it was fed by a river delta. And so rivers, as we know on Earth, wherever there's a river delta, we can find clays and we can find minerals and special types of rocks that can hold those clues or fingerprints of life. And so if we can find these biosignatures by acquiring samples and we can bring them back to Earth for further analysis, we can actually answer that really fundamental and elusive question that whether life exists on anywhere else in the solar system and beyond.
So expanding on what Kavita just said, what does Perseverance have that other rovers such as Curiosity did not, and what will enable us to get more details about the planet right now from this mission?
Absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the rover and the rover scientific suite itself. So it definitely has a lot different instrumentation than what Curiosity did, which itself was the most sophisticated geologist we had ever sent to Mars before Perseverance got there. And I would say the two main instrumentations or two main things that Perseverance has that are different are the sample caching system and a suite of instrumentation that includes an instrumentation called MOXIE. They're both doing two different things. So let's talking about the sample caching system. It's basically a robotic arm within the rover itself, in addition to the robotic arm it has. It's going to help us take materials that are sampled and cored and then store them in clean sample tube that we will then the rover will then deposit on the Martian surface so that the next mission, the sample return lander mission, can come collect those samples and then send them back to Earth. That in itself is an amazing ability, right? Because even though these rovers, Perseverance, Curiosity, and the other rovers and landers before it are very sophisticated robotic geologists, the best analysis we could often do on these samples would be here on Earth. So that if we can bring samples of Mars back to Earth, that would be amazing. And that's actually one of the main reasons we chose Jezero. I think Kavita already pointed that out. The scientists believe that Jezero is one of the best places where we can see signs of past life. So we want to take samples from that and bring it in. And then you have a sophisticated suite of instrumentations. I really probably don't have time to talk about all of them, but one of them that really will help potentially in future exploration of Mars is an instrumentation called MOXIE, which is doing a test of in situ resource utilization, ISRU, which basically is going to try to make oxygen from the Martian atmosphere. So that's something that we probably want for future missions, especially if we bring humans to Mars. So Perseverance has some sophisticated technology that is really just pushing the boundaries of what science can do. And Perseverance, the EDL system itself did a couple of different things, more so than Curiosity, that is really going to expand our ability to send missions to Mars. We can target different locations on Mars. We can get to sites that geologists and scientists really want us to get to. So as an engineer, when I see the surface of Mars where geologists want to get to. Geologists say, okay, this has this kind of rocks, this has this kind of surface where we would expect life to be, or where we could see something that is groundbreaking. And to me, they're hazards. They're just hazards. They're places that I don't want to land because those are hard for my rover, they're hard for my EDL system. But we have to come up with the technology to get there. And that's really the envelope that Perseverance has pushed with a couple of the EDL technologies that it has on board.
So I thought we could proceed, say, chronologically. Everyone's excited about sending these sophisticated missions to these planets, but a lot of people are not really aware of how these missions are planned and then executed. So Kavita, could you tell us a little bit about how long it took to plan this mission and what went on before work actually started?
So I would say that missions, this Mars 2020 mission and projects of this flavor are, they're called flagship missions, and they take a, it's a long journey from formulation all the way to operations. And it takes several years. I think it can take from 8 years to a decade to go from formulation to actual operations. And I would like to add that, at the project level, the Mars 2020 project, you can think of it as, composed of different segments. So we have what is called the project system, which is like the umbrella organization under which we have these subsegments, and those segments are catering to some specific, core functionalities. So for example, we have the payload system. The payload system takes care of all the instrumentation that we just discussed about, all the sophisticated instruments and mechanisms that we have that go with the instruments. So that payload system, there's the flight system, which comprises of the hardware that we built, the rover, the descent stage, the cruise stage, the entire spacecraft, right? Building of that, integration of that, development, and then we have what is called the mission system. The mission system, it comprises of two teams. I'd like to break it down a little bit just for my own benefit. And that is, it comprises of the ground data system, which provides us the software and the infrastructure, the software tools. And then we have what is called the mission operations system. And those are the teams that are going to operate the mission. So these segments, and I want to also point out that we have what is called flight software, and that is the software that goes on board the rover or the spacecraft, and that's how we communicate with it. And it takes care of all the actions or the functions that have to be performed from a software perspective on the spacecraft or the rover. And so these segments, they have to all work in unison to actually accomplish, to come up with this mission in the end. And there is a multitude of teams that are involved. Each of these segments have their own set of teams. So there's like a whole slew of people, multitude of engineers, scientists working on this mission. And all of these segments, they have to go through these phases. And you can think of, at the beginning, we have the concept, we're coming up with the concept of the mission. That's the formulation phase. Then we transition into what is called preliminary design. And then from preliminary design, we go into critical design and implementation, followed by whatever we have built, whatever we started building, that we have to start testing it. So it's called assembly, test, launch, and operations. And then we transition into operations phase, where we start with launch. And then from launch, we go to the cruise, EDL, and then ultimately surface operations, where we can actually begin to accomplish the science objectives of the mission. So like I mentioned, all these different segments and all the sub-teams and multitude of engineers and scientists, they have to go through all these phases and go from the inception of the design to the implementation and the testing of that. So all these functions have to all come together. All the segments have to come together. So it's a really involved process. And we have these gate products and milestones at the end of each phase to make sure that we are accomplishing what we have to, so that we can keep, keep track of where we are.
And Soum, can you tell us a little bit about the testing process itself when it comes to entry, descent, and landing? What are some of the parameters that you have to consider, and how do you test, and how long does it take before you decide that the spacecraft is flight ready?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So one of the problems for testing for entry, descent, and landing, especially for Mars on Earth, is that it's really hard to replicate the same conditions that our system's going to face on Mars on Earth, and really doing an end-to-end testing where we could, go to the top of the atmosphere and go all the way down to the sky crane phase, and testing every single element in order is just not possible on Earth. So oftentimes we're doing subsystem testings and chaining the test parameters together between different subsystems. So we'll test the parachute segment by itself. We'll test the heating on the aerodynamic capsule by itself, or we'll test the rockets on the descent stage. And we're basically trying to get them into different input conditions and different output conditions so that they can be chained together. Otherwise, we also do a lot of testing really on computers, on simulation. So that's actually one of my part of the EDL team. I'm doing the flight dynamics simulation for EDL as part of another sub team. And so that's one of the few ways where we can test so-called end-to-end, going from the top of the atmosphere all the way down to the bottom by simulating different models of Mars, and seeing how these systems, the sky crane system, the parachute system, can do. But then, we're doing these on computer simulations, but we also want some real life fidelity behind it. So I'll say another test that I was part of while being part of the Mars 2020, working for Mars 2020, was the Aspire parachute testing. So the parachute system on Curiosity, which landed in 2012, was very similar to our parachutes. However, we really wanted to test some components of the Mars 2020 parachutes in between 2012 when Curiosity landed and before we were launching in 2020. So we had a series of sounding rocket tests. So these are rockets that don't go all the way to orbit Earth. They go up and then come straight back down. So we did a series of sounding rocket tests at different Mach numbers, at different pressures at which these parachutes can open to simulate conditions that we would see on Mars. And we had 3 successful tests of the same parachute that ultimately flew on Mars. And the coded message that you saw on the parachute, that's basically, well, we didn't test it with that coded message, but we tested that parachute 3 times to really build trust that we can fly on Mars. And we actually we tested it to higher conditions than what we ever expected on Mars, just to make sure that we have what we call margin in our system design. So that's really key for especially NASA missions that we do for that we have a large margin of safety built into our engineering design so that we can feel confident when we send it into planetary destinations that we can't really test end-to-end all the time.
So you'd mentioned Curiosity. Can you tell us a little bit more about the similarities and the differences between the EDL processes with Perseverance and Curiosity?
When they got to Curiosity, we were landing a bigger item in Curiosity. Curiosity was pretty close to 1 metric ton, and really Perseverance is basically about the same, give or take a few kilograms here and there. So at that payload, we needed to have sky crane system developed for Curiosity. But I'll go back to your first question, and then I'll talk a little bit about the sky crane itself. What was different between Curiosity and Perseverance? So when you look at the big picture of what Curiosity did and what Perseverance did, it will look very similar. In fact, we came in this aeroshell where we went through peak heating. And then after we went through peak heating, we jettisoned the heat shield so that we can see the surface. So the radar, we didn't jettison the heat shield first. We came in the aeroshell, then we opened the parachute, we slowed down enough, then we jettisoned the heat shield so that we can see the surface, we can take images, or radar beams can intersect the surface so that we know where we are. Then we let go of the parachute and came down in this descent stage all the way down to the ground, right above the ground. Then we started the sky crane maneuver where the rover was lowered down with these bridles so that it would hit so it would touch down on the surface. And when the rover said, "I have touched down," the descent stage would cut off the ropes and fly away. That's basically the same thing what Curiosity did and Perseverance did too. But there were two key differences that were added in there that makes Perseverance's EDL system so much more capable. And really, it's a look into what future systems would be. So one of them was something called range trigger, and that's this completely flight software related change that we did, and it's a very small flight software related change. When Perseverance's parachute, when Curiosity's parachute opened, it opened at a certain velocity, saying, "Hey, when you get to the speed, open your parachute." That worked really well for Curiosity. But what we realized is that if we wanted to land in places like Jezero, we were looking at 8-10 sites at the beginning of the mission. We all realized that the geologists really wanted us to land right near where their scientific goals are. So we didn't want the rover to drive for a long distance. So if we wanted to land right there, we wanted to land in the zone that was smaller, what we call the landing ellipse, where we think we would land. We wanted that ellipse to be as small as possible. So the one change we did was called range trigger, where we said, okay, the parachute's going to open when it's a certain distance away from the target. Seems like a very simple change, and it was in the flight software, but makes a big difference. That landing ellipse shrinks almost half based on just that one change that we did. So that's something Perseverance did that no other mission before had done. And really the other big thing that it did, and I think you've seen videos and conversations about it, is called terrain relative navigation. So what that means is that we had cameras on board. So after that heat shield came off, we can look at the ground, and based on the pictures, we were able to co-locate, hey, you know what, this landmark is on this onboard map, and there are hundreds of these landmarks that we're trying to match, so that we can tell where we are within tens of meters. We can say, okay, we're really right over this little tiny crater to within 10-meter accuracy. So with that kind of accuracy, we can pinpoint where we want to go, a safe spot on the ground, and get there. And in fact, we landed within about 5 meters of where we targeted. So that kind of accuracy allows future missions, not just to Mars, but to other planetary destinations, to now really go where the scientists want us to go, but get there safely.
The entire process is autonomous, right? So could you walk us a little bit through what happens from when the spacecraft is launched? What are the different teams that kick in, and how communication is monitored, and how communication is monitored during the EDL process itself?
So basically what happens is, I would say that not from launch, a little before launch, 6 to 8 months prior to launch, what is called the mission operations system that I hinted at earlier, they have been developing their processes and identifying what roles and what those roles are supposed to do during operations. They start formulating this team, which is actually going to evolve into the operations team. And what they start doing is they start practicing simulations of operations through different levels of fidelity of testing. And that includes, what we call thread tests, and then we have the operation readiness tests. And what they're really doing is trying to recreate the scenarios from the standpoint of when we get the data during this critical event, how are we going to process that data? What are the operations teams going to be doing with that? And how are they going to use their processes in order to take the next step? And the teams that come into play, there is in the mission operations system, we have several teams. There is a team that takes care of the engineering operations, another one for rover operations, another one for science operations. There's a ground data system operations, and then the instrument data system operations. These operations teams, they are also, provided all the support and help that is needed in terms of the tools and the infrastructure by the ground data system team, and the flight software by the flight software team. And then all these capabilities, they have to all come together. And I also want to say that there is another team, not really part of the operations, but providing help with the underlying infrastructure, which we call the ITSD. So it provides, basically, you can think of as in the information technology sector at JPL, which is kind of cross-cutting across different missions. And then we have the way we communicate with the spacecraft once it is launched. And that is the deep space network. So the deep space network is, it caters to the need of multiple missions. And what it does is it has a set of these deep space complexes around the world. And these complexes are strategically located so that they are longitudinally 120 degrees apart. And what that allows the deep space network to accomplish is that at any given time, we will have at least one antenna at one of those complexes be able to see the spacecraft. And when I say see the spacecraft, meaning we can communicate with it. We can send signals to it and we can get data back from it. So that is one key thing. That's how we communicate with the spacecrafts. During EDL, so essentially what happens is it depends on what phase of the mission we are in. So if we are launch or cruise, let's say once we have launched, we go into cruise. That's where, like, after initial acquisition, which is done by DSN, we acquire the signal from the spacecraft after launch. Then essentially what we are doing is the way we are communicating with the deep space network is via these ground stations at one of those complexes. And those stations, what they do is we have the capability to either do a direct to Earth, which means the data that's coming back from the spacecraft is directly sent from the spacecraft to the station. And then once the station acquires that data, it then sends it over to the ground data system, which then does all the further processing of the data. The second part of it is the uplink. So during cruise and EDL, we have I'll talk about the EDL separately, but during cruise, we have the ability to send signals. We have to send commands to the spacecraft to tell it what it has to do. And so those commands, essentially, the pathway is, again, those stations. And those stations basically take the command load that we provide to the station and send it to the spacecraft via what is called the DFE, which is direct from Earth. That's the mode in which we operate. And once the spacecraft gets those commands, then it can execute them and do the functions that it's supposed to perform. During the EDL phase, the situation is a little tricky. Like I think Som pointed out, and you also pointed out, the EDL phase, we really don't have the time because we only have the 7 minutes of terror, we call it. So there's only 7 minutes from the point where, from the injection point to where the rover touches down on the surface of Mars. And because of the really large distance between Earth and Mars, the time it takes for the signal from a station on the ground to go to Mars is, which we call it the one-way light time, is about 11.5 minutes or so. And that's too long. We cannot do EDL by means of real-time commanding. So everything, whatever we need to do, has to be on board the spacecraft, on board the flight software has to have that ability to autonomously navigate the spacecraft and the rover through the sequence of events during EDL to the surface of Mars. That said, we also have, just to get visibility into that whole sequence of events. So all that sequence of events is actually taking place autonomously. There's no human in the loop there. But then in order for us to, get that feedback that things actually took place the way they were supposed to, we try to make use of these orbiting missions. There are these orbiters that we have orbiting around Mars. And specifically, we have MRO, we have Odyssey, we have Maven and TGO. Those are the orbiting assets. And I think during the entry, descent, and landing sequence of events, we had MRO, we had an overflight of MRO, which was able to capture that whole sequence of events and the data, the telemetry that was being sent from the spacecraft and the rover during the entry, descent, and landing sequence of events. They were actually, captured by Odyssey and MRO, and they were relayed back to Earth. So there was another station on the Earth listening to those signals from Odyssey and from MRO. And that's how we were able to get that, the go ahead very quickly that, yes, we landed on the surface of Mars. That said, I just want to add that the ability to be able to do this relay is just an added feature. It's an enhancement for us to get visibility into the sequence of events sooner than later, but it's not a requirement for the entry, descent, and landing sequence of events per se, because entry, descent, and landing, as you know, has to happen autonomously using the onboard software. And I would also say that once we land on the surface of Mars, most of our communication that takes place between the Earth and Mars is via those orbiting relay assets.
Right.
And there's a back and forth communication between the entry team, cruise team, and the orbiter teams in the months and weeks coming up to EDL, where the choreography that the orbiters are going to do in order to relay the data. We really time it with each other. In fact, one segment I was part of was the HighRise Instrumentation, which is the camera on board MRO that actually took a picture of Mars 2020 landing on its parachute. We were timing that picture to be taken at a certain time so that we could see the parachute and we can see the vehicle. So that specific timing is pretty critical, and that's something that we iterated on really up to a few weeks before landing.
I wanted to just sidetrack a little bit, and now we know that NASA especially is a veteran at landing on Mars. So could you elaborate a little bit on what the challenges are when it comes to landing on Mars, and say compare it with landing a spacecraft on Earth through Earth's atmosphere, or even on Venus with the atmosphere and gravity there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mars is kind of a pesky place to land. It has enough atmosphere where you can't just use propellants and rockets to slow down from 12,000 kilometers per hour to 0 kilometers per hour, because that's just going to take too much propellant, and there's just atmosphere there that's going to heat you up. But it doesn't have enough atmosphere like Earth or Venus or another planetary body we like to go to, Titan, has, where the atmosphere will do all the job for you, and it will slow you down pretty much close to what you want to be. It doesn't slow you down enough so that we need big parachutes on Mars that open at twice the speed, almost at twice the speed of sound, in order to slow us down even further. So Mars is very a finesse entry, descent, and landing area where you have to account for the aeroheating. You have to take thermal systems to protect you from the extreme heat that's generated when you're going through the top of the atmosphere on Mars. But you also have to have parachute systems that are sophisticated, like the ones that are supersonic parachutes that open at almost 2 times the speed of sound. And then when you get close down to the ground, there's a lot of rocks and dust that's on the surface of Mars. And if you take your rockets all the way down to the ground, you could be potentially digging a big hole in which you're landing. So you have to be careful about that. So that's where actually the sky crane maneuver comes in. We, hover right above the surface and then let go of the rover down so that we're not kicking up as much dust, what we call plume surface interaction. We're not kicking all this stuff up that's going to damage the rover, that's going to hit something else. So it's a very technically challenging place to land. I'm not saying that Earth entry or Venus entry is any easier at the end of the day, but Mars, just because of its atmosphere, thin enough atmosphere, creates enough of issues that you really have to get everything going. And that's really what keeps a lot of us worried in those 7 minutes of terror, that all that choreography that has to happen one after another, it has to happen perfectly, by the way.
And is this also how it would work for the helicopter? It does have the Ingenuity helicopter. I know that the rover will drop off the helicopter and then move away to a safe distance, right? Do we have an idea of when that's expected to happen and what the process of the chopper's flight would be like?
So the helicopter operations, the Ingenuity operations are, I think, starting in next month, if I'm not mistaken, although I don't have the specific date on hand. And yeah, after the rover systems have been all tested out, that is one of the things we'll do, where we'll deploy the helicopter by letting it go, and then the rover will drive off a little bit, so that then the helicopter and the rover can communicate and make sure that the communications between the two are okay, as well as when the Ingenuity helicopter starts flying up, it's not going to be anywhere near the rover in sense of interacting with the rover through that kind of mechanism. So that is something that the Ingenuity helicopter testing has kind of looked at in the past.
Okay, so now we have a whole bunch of images. We have thousands and thousands of images that are coming in. Kavita, could you walk us a little bit through the process of what the process pipeline is like for all of this data that's coming in? How are all of these images, the raw images, released? How are they processed? And which parts of this entire operation are automated?
Once we get that data from the rover, we basically, what we have on the ground data system side is a set of subsystems that take care of the downlink processing. And these subsystems, there is a subsystem that takes the data and processes the data so that we can extract the telemetry, and we can construct what are called raw data products. And then those raw data products are fed into this image processing pipeline, which runs in the cloud infrastructure, and then generates the first order of instrument data products. And when I call instrument data products, they are the images, and then we can have this next order of processing take place on those the first order of instrument data products, to create what are called like mosaics. You might have seen that amazing panoramic, the 3D mosaic that was created by from images from Mastcam Z. All that is happening. That additional layer of processing involves stitching of all these images, individual images, to create that panorama. And then now we have this unique ability to also have videos. So once all of that processing is done, which all takes place in an automated manner, the pipeline is all fully automated. There is a little bit of human intervention required every now and then during operations when we have to upgrade the software, but it's primarily automated. And then once we have gone through that entire processing that I just described, the data is made available to the public, and it's put on what is called the outreach website. Anyone can go access that data. And in fact, the public is encouraged to take a look at that data and do their own analysis. What I would like to say is that the release of these images is done once we have done an internal review of what images have been constructed. Then we go ahead and release those images.
Soum, could you tell us a little bit about now that the EDL process itself is done, what do teams that worked on EDL now work on next, and what are you hoping to do with the mission next?
Well, no, absolutely. So now that EDL has been done, we take a little bit of a break. The last couple of weeks, especially leading up to EDL, is a nonstop work for us. But we're starting to get these data products back that Kavita was talking about. So we're using that information to reconstruct what actually happened on flight. So reconstruction is a big critical component for us. We want to know as engineers how our system did. So we're actually right in the midst of it. We are getting back data from the inertial measurement unit on the vehicle, which kind of tells us the accelerations and rates that the vehicle went through. We're getting these images from the terrain relative navigation system, so we can actually see what landmarks did that system actually match on Mars, and if there were any outliers, etc. So that kind of information then feeds us into looking at, again, how the system did, and really our models. Those are the things that we can test on Earth, in lieu of the fact that Mars environment cannot be reconstructed here 100%. We use that to see how well our models did. Did they do as well as we expected them to do within the certain level that we care about, or were they way off? And after Curiosity, we saw mostly that we were able to model things correctly, but there were a few things we tweaked here and there. And we're going to do the same thing after Perseverance. So we're looking at that data right now and saying, okay, we could do this thing better, or this is perfect. Let's make sure that the next mission that uses this kind of data takes these lessons learned and uses them correctly. So reconstruction is a big component, and we're really trying to ramp that up and complete it as soon as possible, as things are fresh on people's minds and before people get moved on to other projects. But I will also say this: the data that Perseverance is going to have, especially the video data, is a very unique opportunity. We haven't really had this kind of video from other missions. Curiosity had a small camera that took pictures as it was landing, but it was at a very, very low frame rate, nothing like what we're seeing from Perseverance. So students that will come afterwards, and even future young engineers who are coming into the field, will be able to look at that data and really discover new things that we hadn't even thought of, or new models that they need to design. I myself was a grad student when Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity landed. I was part of the reconstruction team at that point while I was finishing up my grad school, and the data from that mission was invaluable for me as I was finishing up my work. And I expect that just the plethora of data that we have collected with Perseverance already is going to help the next generation really discover things that we haven't even thought of already.
We do have a lot of viewers who are interested. Space is a really interesting topic, and everyone is curious about the people working there. So could you tell us a little bit about what you studied and what your career path was like before you ended up at NASA and worked here?
I can start. So I will say I got into this field. I was born in India, and I was a sixth grade student in India in 1997 when the Mars Pathfinder rover, the first rover we ever landed on Mars, got there. And in the heydays of early internet, I remember seeing these pictures that, Kavita is talking about, these data products that NASA puts out there. I remember seeing those images, and I was like, wow, these are images from Mars that I can see on my computer. And of course, at that time, it was school's computer, not even my own personal computer. So that really got me into the field. And now here I am 20, some years later, I'm actually part of a project that landed something on Mars. So, that's kind of the reason I got into it. I studied aerospace engineering, and now, I'm part of the entry, descent, and landing team.
Kavita?
Yeah, so to begin with my journey, I think as a just beginning from right from the beginning, as a child, I was always intrigued and mesmerized by the elusiveness of space, and all the mystery and the charm, the intrinsic charm that it has. And so that was always, and I was always like an avid learner of science and math, and I wanted to do something in that area. And so that's why I chose the field of engineering. I did my bachelor's in electronics and electrical communications from India, from Punjab Engineering College in Chandigarh. And then I got married. I worked for a couple of years in that sector, and then I got married, came here to the United States, and I pursued my master's in computer science. I didn't really know that all along, this path, that I would end up being at NASA. But I think I was really fortunate that at the end of my master's, there was a JPL on-campus interview during which I got recruited. And at the time I had two different choices, but the choice was very easy for me to make at that time, because I have been an avid space fan from the very beginning. And JPL's affiliation with NASA, coupled with the ability to work with an amazing, set of engineers and scientists who are known for their diligence, their commitment, and a very strong work ethic. The answer was very easy. JPL is where I wanted to be, and I'm happy to say I've been at JPL for a really long time, and now we are, here in the midst of this really historic time for both JPL and for NASA and the space community at large with the Perseverance's landing. And we are all looking forward to the next set of steps, which is the collection of those samples and getting the answer to that really fundamental question: is there life out there, outside, of the realm of Earth? Is there life on Mars, or was there life ever on Mars? And that'll be a really big accomplishment if we can answer that question.
Right. That actually brings me to my last question to both of you. Given the nature of evolving missions and their increasing complexity, as well as the potential increased human spaceflight in the future, where do you see a lot of career scope for other youngsters who are currently, say, in school or college and who do have a keen interest in participating in future space programs?
Well, so I'm really interested in bringing these samples back, right? So Mars 2020 is phase 1 of Mars sample return. So the next mission we'll send needs to send something that can go fetch these samples back and then send them back to Earth. So that's also an EDL task, both at Mars and also at Earth, because this thing has to come back to Earth. So I'm part of some teams that are already looking into that work. So it's really exciting. They have their own different challenges. They may not be landing a 1 metric ton rover like we did, but they have to land very close to where the samples are. And then when they're coming back to Earth, they have to make sure that that sample is protected and is going to land successfully on Earth at a very, very high probability. So those challenges make it really exciting to work for the next missions. So that's, at least that's my what I'm looking for.
I think there is a lot of potential, a lot of venues, a lot of opportunities for the up and coming, people, the youngsters who want to venture into the space program. As you have seen, there is a whole slew of teams that have to come together. There is engineering that's needed, and we need mechanical engineers who can build these rovers, think of these out of the box ideas like the sky crane maneuver or things like that. We need navigation engineers. We need electronics and electrical engineers. There's computer science that has a really big role to play, especially in the area of not only automating everything, but also artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've seen it with Perseverance's landing, that such a system can be miraculously accurate and can land us on Mars and can improve the precision of that landing significantly. And then there is a need for the follow-on missions that are going to be there. There is going to be scientists, the need for scientists. So we need astrobiologists, people who are interested in physics, biology, geology. That's another area that is really very, very interesting to explore. And then last but not the least, we are going to very soon venture into more human exploration. And when I say that, there is a need for astronautical engineering, astronauts, people who are interested in these programs. So it's a really bright future that we're looking at, and it's going to be a really exciting decade. I think there's a lot to accomplish in this upcoming decade.
I think Kavita touched on pretty much the essential points. What I would say is that as a student who's interested in the Mars landings that you just saw with the videos, they need to think about what really drives them, what passion really drives them, because there aren't many jobs out there that really can't have their way into affecting a future planetary mission, I'll call it, because it could be to Mars, it could be to Moon, it could be to another destination. NASA has several missions that they're looking at for moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and going to asteroids. All of these things ultimately have one thing in mind. You have to think outside the box, as Kavita said, and you have to think about what you're working on, what you're really good at, what you're really passionate about, how that can feed into this kind of work. I mean, as we're talking about humans and sending humans to different planets, you have to really think about things like human factors, work. So we're not just talking about automation and aerospace engineers that can design autonomous systems to land on a planet, but you have to deal with real life people. So psychology of that, their medicine, things of that nature can and have definite applications into future space flights. So whether you're really good, I would say, this cook that needs to make food for the humans going into another planet, or if you are really good in astronautics and you can design the flight trajectory that will take these humans and other robotic missions to Mars or Titan or some other place, just do what you're really passionate about and then see how that can apply to space. And if you look at NASA internships, you will notice that we take interns from so many different backgrounds and different educational levels. We have some internships that start out really young for even middle school, high school level, all the way to postdoctoral level. So you're never too old to work at a place like NASA, and you are not in the wrong major to work at a place like NASA. There's always a place for you if you're passionate about space. And so what you really need to think about is, what are you actually passionate about? And then see how you can help us do the next main thing. The parachute had dare mighty things on it. You have to be able to dare mighty things.
Everything is interdisciplinary these days, and I do hope the young people and students who are watching and listening are taking notes. This was an extremely insightful discussion. I, for one, learned a lot. Thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us. I know both of you are on different time zones, and I'm very grateful that we could coordinate and have the discussion together. And I do hope that we're able to have you again with us in the future.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much.